In this video, I will talk about different types of conflict. Most importantly, we talk, of course, about the context of interest and about armed conflicts, which is wars, but um, for you to have a general idea. So, before I'm going to talk about the topic itself, I would like to start with a little bit of historical background. Um, so, the modern world as we know it today is going to forge in late 18th, 19th century when nationalism is going to appear as a result of Napoleonic Wars. So people are going to reject the borders that were mostly the result of local wars and royal marriages, and instead they are starting to regroup according to national domains, according to their nationality, according to their ethnicity, according to their religion, or according to the language that they possess. So as a result, in 19th century we have the emergence of the nation-state system based on the idea of the nationalism. So what is, very briefly once again, what is a nation? Nation are the people that possess the same culture, like for example the Mexicans. What is a state? State, it's the governmental system that is defined on the certain territory. So what is a nation state? A nation state means that like in Mexico, the majority are Mexicans, both concepts of nations and the state, they're going to be embodied in just one country. For example, I know that the French people live in France. This is the example of a nation state. Is this always true? The answer is no. We have, for example, a lot of multinational states, like the Russian Federation, that has a lot of different nationalities, that speak different languages, that have different religions, different cultures. They join together in one big federation. This is going to be an example of a multinational state. Also, we have cases divided nations when the same nation lives in different states and doesn't have a state of their own. So, stateless nation or divided nation are going to be those nations that don't have their own state. And you may ask, well, why do we want to create our own state for our nation? Well, because of the feeling of nationalism, that the nation is looking for its sovereignty and the self-determination so that they may decide on their own for themselves what kind of government, what kind of economy, what kind of state they want to live in. So, talking about the same concepts today, we have around 3,000 to 5,000 different nations. So, quite obvious from this, you may conclude that uh, the majority of the states that exist today, they are multinational because we have way more nations than the states. So more than 95% of all those states, they have different nationalities mixed together. And for example, this is a kind of old, so that you may have a perspective compared to today. So 30 years ago, 180 nation states existed, but out of this, only 15 were purely nation states, and in 30%, there was no even one biggest majority group. So it was like a lot of smaller groups joined together. Example of real nation state could be Iceland. That's a very small nation state in Europe that is quite to the north, and they are a pure nation state. In case of Portugal, for example, we also talk about nation state because there is one nation that is the majority of the population. The Portuguese, they are not the only nation living there, but they are going to be the majority of the people. And we have examples of Belgium or Switzerland, where we have multiple ethnic groups with different linguistics, with different religions. They live together without none of them being dominant. For example, maybe you know that in Belgium they speak two languages. Part of the country is French speaking, and part of the country is Germanic speaking. Uh, so they have two major languages. And in case of Switzerland, it's even more complicated. So I've put for you here the map. So please have a look at the map of the main languages. You may see that there is German, there is French, there is Italian, there is Romansh, all of being spoken in different parts, with German being 64%, but this is close to the half of the population, but still, uh, like this is not 90% as you would expect in case of a nation state. And in case of religion, it's even more complex. You may see that Catholics are about 43%, Protestants are another big group, 4% is Islam, and 2% is Orthodox Christianity. So for you to have this idea that currently many of the states, they are like Switzerland, they are they have multiple nationalities with multiple different religions and languages, all spoken in just one country. And the classical example of stateless nation that is continued to be so for several decades already, it are the Kurds. The Kurds, they live in the Middle East, and they represent a big problem for the political debate in the region because they represent 20% of the population of Turkey. They represent 20% of the population of Iran. They about 10% of population of Iraq and about 8% of the population of Syria. So you may see that these are quite um, representative groups in each one of those countries. And of course, none of those countries wants to lose their territory and lose their integrity in order for the creation of a Kurdish state, a state of Kurdistan. So this problem was continuing um, for several decades now, and it's still far from being far from being resolved. And finally, let's talk about ethnicity. What is ethnicity? Well, ethnicity means that a group of people is going to share their some kind of ancestral culture. They share the same origin. They have more or less the same culture. Usually, they have certain religion, and their identity is based on this belief of the common ancestry. So, in case of ethnic group, we may talk about some kind of extended kinship. They are like non-close relatives, so to say. So it's like the idea of being one big family. As a result, there is a certain ethnocentrism. This means that those who form part of the group are going to be favored, and those who do not, they are going to have a certain prejudice. So basically, ethnocentrism favors ours against all outsiders. And this is good and this is bad. This is good because it creates a unity among the people, and this is bad because this could be easily used for some kind of violence and, for example, dehumanization. When we when and for example, when over time they teach that a certain group that is different from us is bad, so over time this may create certain animosity. Um, with other ethnic groups and result in a conflict in the future. Um, when we talk about conflict, one of the most important things that we have to talk about is, of course, separatism. Um, 70% of all international conflicts is because of the territory when they try to retake back the territory that was lost, or some kind of minorities that are looking for self-determination. Um, and this continues to be so. So this fighting, you may say, well, how important the land is? Well, it's not important at all, but still, even today, like separatism is going to be one of the main causes of local international conflicts. So going to see the general picture. So what do we have here? So we've been talking about the conflicts. And when we talk about the conflicts, we talk about two types of conflicts, conflicts of ideas and conflicts of interest. In case of conflicts of ideas, the most important, of course, is the ethnic conflict that I was explaining to you. When we have one ethnic group that wants, is like to unify itself, and they see outsiders or some particular other ethnic group as the enemy. The religious conflict, um, it's very also a big topic even today. In the recent years, for example, they talked a lot about Islamic movements in the Middle East, about Islamic terrorism, etc., etc. But we have a very long history of animosity between Christians and Muslims that existed since the time of Crusade. So like you may see today, oh, the Muslims they are bad, but well, actually, the Christians they will know better in the moment, and they still continue, for example, messing up in the region. And they often talk about the mirror perspective. Just like many Christians perceive Muslims as terrorists, many Muslims perceive Christians as also like terrorists and oppressors, etc., etc. Um, and more specifically, for example, the rights of women. Meanwhile, people in Islamic countries they think that the Christians they are not respecting the women, that that there is too much assent on sexuality in Western culture. Meanwhile, vice versa, we perceive Muslim women as being oppressed by their culture. The ideological conflict, of course, the classical example is the Cold War. So, it was a conflict over ideas, most importantly, like a confrontation between communism and capitalism. But it resulted in quite real, very hot, not cold wars in different parts of the region, of like, for example, Africa or Asia, etc. And the second type of conflict is conflict of interest. So I have it over here, the conflict of interest. Interest means that there is some kind of tangible cause for the conflict, like, for example, the territory. I already talked about separatism as the main cause of the wars. When the borders they do not match between different ethnic and nationalities. Um, You may argue that today, if a few years ago, well, not few years, like I know, in 19th century, the land was very important because the land would provide food, the land would provide resources. Today, it's not as important as it was, but still, we have a lot of conflicts over the territory that also, for example, include territorial waters and the airspace or the space above the countries that is controlled. Uh, the second type of conflict is the control over government. When the countries, for example, we have different parts inside of the country who are fighting to obtain control, especially the supplies, for example, in dictatorial government. And finally, a conflict over the economic interests or economic conflicts. This could be, for example, the fight for some kind of strategic resources or etc. Or for example, the famous for Mexico, the drug trafficking, right? So the drug trafficking and illegal trade of drugs across the border creates a conflict between Mexico and the United States, and theoretically, if one does not collaborate, it could result in a war. So since I mentioned the war, I need to mention that um, we may study the causes of the war using different levels of analysis. That's why you have this topic in particular. So you may analyze what are the causes of a particular war, looking at the system in general. So like how the global system is functioning, looking at the states and their interests, and looking at individual leaders and their ideas. And we have different types of war. First of all, obviously the total war. The classical example is going to be the Second World War, when we have using all the resources, all the maximum effort. Everyone is involved in the war. It's a total war. It's the war of the whole country. Then we talk about the hegemonic wars. The hegemonic wars, it's the war for control of the entire world, right? So like Pinky and the Brain, right? They were trying to conquer the world. Or you may talk about Napoleon Bonaparte, who was trying to control the world. So this is a case of hegemonic war. We talk about the guerrilla war, when we have an army fighting against some army that is not like a defined army. In other words, we're having guerrilleros, who are like small armies that are hide between civilians, so that the normal army feels demotivated. They feel like they don't know whom they're fighting against. So that's why we talk about asymmetric warfare, when like small guerrilla groups are going to attack a huge army, and this army can't really do much about it. The civil war, as you already know, by the definition, it's the war between different parts of the country or the war between different participants inside of the same country. And finally, the limited war, this is supposed to be the modern war, when we have a very precise military strike in some very precise region, and limited wars, they're usually very fast. They're just going to target some particular region or some particular target and then over. Like so, and most of the modern wars today, they supposed to be like this. They supposed just like to target a particular regime, I don't know, to take away the dictator, and then that's the end of the war.